There are no camera flashes here, no journalists. There is only the cold screen of a Delta tactical terminal, the situational awareness system of the armed forces of Ukraine, displaying a target density that no NATO analyst had predicted for this stage of the war. In 24 hours, between May 11th and May 12th, 2026, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense logged the elimination of 1,230 Russian soldiers, killed, wounded, captured, missing, in a single day. This is not an isolated spike. This is the new average. Since the beginning of March 2026, Ukrainian General Staff records show Russia losing between 1,100 and 1,610 men per day. Numbers that, when annualized, represent a hemorrhage of more than 400,000 combatants per year. To put that in perspective, the war in Afghanistan cost the Soviet Union approximately 15,000 dead over 10 years. Russia is losing that equivalent every 2 weeks. And right now, while you watch this video, the clock is still running. Let's start with the raw data, because this is where the story begins to collapse for the Kremlin. According to continuous Ukrainian tracking systems, as of May 18, 2026, total confirmed Russian casualties since February 24, 2022, stand at approximately 1,348,790 soldiers, killed, wounded, and missing in action. In equipment, more than 11,939 tanks destroyed, 24,583 armored fighting vehicles, 42,262 artillery systems, and, perhaps the most revealing number of all, 295,454 drones shot down or destroyed, most of them, ironically, by Ukrainian forces using systems that cost a fraction of the Russian price tag. But the number that is keeping analysts at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, from sleeping at night is not the cumulative total. It is the killed-to-wounded ratio. In modern warfare, the standard benchmark is 1 dead for every 3 to 5 wounded. Because field medical evacuation systems function, because soldiers reach aid stations, because 21st century combat medicine saves lives that would have been lost in earlier conflicts. In World War II, that ratio was approximately 1 to 3. In the Soviet-Afghan War, roughly 1 to 4. In Ukraine, in 2026, President Zelensky cited intelligence assessments suggesting that 62% of Russian casualties are killed, not wounded. 62%. A complete inversion of the historical pattern. What is causing this? Why are Russian soldiers dying so much faster than they are being rescued? The answer is flying 2 meters above the ground at 120 kilometers per hour, equipped with a 200-gram TNT warhead and a computer vision system that distinguishes a Russian helmet from a shrub with 94% accuracy. The commander of Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, Robert Madyar Brovdy, released a figure on May 4, 2026, that should have been on the front page of every military journal on the planet. Between December 2025 and April 2026, just 5 months, Ukrainian drones alone caused 156,735 Russian casualties. Verified through the Delta system, name by name, coordinate by coordinate, video clip by video clip. That is an average of more than 30,000 men per month, caused exclusively by drones. To understand what this means operationally, you need to understand what has changed on the battlefield since 2024. FPV drones, first-person view, have evolved from reconnaissance tools into low-cost precision lethal weapons, manufactured in improvised factories across Ukraine at a cost of $400 to $800 per unit. Ukraine is now producing, according to NATO estimates, between 100,000 and 150,000 drones per month, more than the entire Russian defense industry can supply in equivalent munitions. Systems like the Beaver, the heavy-lift Baba Yaga, capable of carrying up to 30 kilograms of payload, and the new AI-guided autonomous strike systems that the Ukrainian command still refuses to name publicly. The result on the ground is surgical and relentless. When a Russian assault column departs its staging positions in the Pokrovsk sector, and on May 17, 2026, there were 234 combat engagements recorded on this axis alone. Ukrainian drone operators are already tracking them. Soldiers advance in groups of 8 to 12 men through shattered wheat fields, mine corridors, and kill zones that offer zero cover. They know there are drones above them. They keep moving forward. Not because they are brave, because the officers ordering them forward are kilometers behind the line, sheltered in concrete reinforced bunkers, and the penalty for refusing to advance is execution. This is not Ukrainian propaganda. It is what pro-war Russian military bloggers are writing in Telegram channels with hundreds of thousands of followers. The commanders place no value on the lives of their soldiers. We are used as cannon fodder. Nobody comes for us when we are wounded. And this is precisely why the killed-to-wounded ratio is inverted. When you are wounded 200 meters from an enemy position in the middle of an open field, with 2 drones circling above you waiting for any movement, the probability of evacuation is not low. It is 0. Here is the paradox that is keeping Moscow's strategists awake at 3 a.m. Russia is losing men faster than it can recruit replacements. The Institute for the Study of War confirmed in January 2026 that for the first time since the invasion began, Russia's casualty rate had surpassed its recruitment rate. Russia needs approximately 30,000 to 35,000 new contracts signed per month just to maintain the current size of its forces in the field. Ukraine's declared objective is to raise that requirement to 50,000 per month, the threshold at which losses become mathematically unsustainable without a general mobilization that Putin refuses to decree. Why the refusal? Because the partial mobilization of September 2022, the first since World War II, triggered nationwide protests and the flight of more than 261,000 military-age men from the country within days. In the first 72 hours after the announcement, flights from Moscow to Istanbul, Belgrade, and Yerevan were sold out for weeks. Putin knows that a second broad mobilization wave could destabilize the regime itself, and so, instead, he is doing something more revealing and more desperate. He is recruiting whoever is available, literally. The Russian human rights outlet RFE/RL documented cases of men being signed up while intoxicated. Yegor Sabinich, a father of 4 from Petrozavodsk, woke up after a night of drinking with friends believing he was at a detox facility. He was actually at a military recruitment office, with a binding military contract already signed in his name while he was unconscious. Russian human rights groups report that cases like this are becoming systematic, but the intoxication cases are just the surface of a much deeper collapse. Russia is actively recruiting in more than 120 countries. Prisoners from Siberian penal colonies are offered pardons and bonuses of 2 million rubles, approximately $26,000, for 1 year of frontline service. Migrants from Central Asia, including women serving prison sentences in Russian facilities, are being offered similar contracts. Cuba, North Korea, and contingents from African nations including Ghana and Kenya have been documented within Russian ranks in Ukraine. And even so, the army cannot replace its dead fast enough. In March and April 2026, the 2 deadliest months of the year so far, Russia lost more than 70,000 soldiers who would not return to the battlefield. If May's pace holds, Russian losses in the spring of 2026 alone will exceed 100,000 killed and wounded in 90 days. For comparison, the United States lost approximately 58,000 soldiers across the entirety of the Vietnam War, over 20 years. Let's go to the ground. The Pokrovsk sector in Donetsk Oblast is the single bloodiest convergence point of the war at this moment. This is where Russia's human wave assault doctrine meets maximum Ukrainian drone-based defense density. This is where the mathematics of war become their most brutal. According to President Zelensky, Ukrainian forces in Pokrovsk are outnumbered at a ratio of 8-to-1 by Russian troops, 8 Russian soldiers for every single Ukrainian defender. In theory, this should be overwhelming. In practice, it is generating a massacre that Western military analysts are beginning to call the 21st century's greatest attrition laboratory. The reason is the geometry of the drone. When you have an 8-to-1 numerical advantage in an open field watched by Ukrainian FPV operators, you do not have an advantage. You have 8 targets per drone operator. The additional infantry does not multiply combat power. It multiplies casualties. And when those additional soldiers are convicts recruited 3 weeks ago with no adequate training, no encrypted communications, no ECM, electronic countermeasures, systems to protect them from drones, they do not reach enemy positions. They reach the casualty registers. In the week of May 11th through 17th, 2026, Russian forces launched more than 3,170 attack drones, 1,300 guided bombs, and 74 missiles against Ukraine. In that same week, Ukraine shot down 279 of the 287 drones launched in a single overnight attack, an interception rate of 97.2%, using systems including the Akash tier and NATO-supplied medium-range air defense batteries. Simultaneously, during the same overnight period, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces conducted strikes on 46 targets in the temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and in Crimea itself. The Ryazan oil refinery, located 500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, reported large explosions and a sustained fire. Ammunition depots in Kaspisk were struck. Russian electronic warfare infrastructure in the occupied East was neutralized, and while Moscow was striking civilian targets, 73 civilians killed in a single week of Russian strikes before the Victory Day ceasefire, including a drone attack on a kindergarten in Sumy that killed 2 people. Ukrainian forces were methodically dismantling the logistical capacity that sustains the entire Russian war machine. There is a second war happening in parallel to the trench war, and in some respects, it is more strategically decisive. Ukraine is destroying Russia's oil export capacity with a precision that is beginning to crack the economic backbone of the Russian war effort. In April 2026 alone, Ukraine conducted 21 strikes on Russian refineries, export terminals, tanker vessels, and pipeline pumping stations, the highest monthly total since December. The result, Russia's crude processing rate fell to 4.69 million barrels per day, approximately 18% below 2021 levels and the lowest refining output in more than 16 years, according to Bloomberg. The suspension of Druzhba pipeline deliveries to Hungary and Slovakia, combined with strikes on Russia's 3 major Western oil export ports, Novorossiysk on the Black Sea, Primorsk, and Ust-Luga on the Baltic, forced Russia to cut oil production by 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day in April alone, the sharpest monthly drop in 6 years. And those are the numbers Russia involuntarily confirms through market data. The real figures are presumed to be worse. For a country whose war machine is funded more than 40% by oil and gas revenues, this is an economic hemorrhage running in perfect parallel to the human hemorrhage in the trenches. Every destroyed refinery means fewer military contracts funded. Fewer contracts mean less equipment. Less equipment means the soldiers recruited by intoxication in Petrozavodsk arrive at the front without modern ballistic vests, without secure communications, without adequate armor on their vehicles. And without those things, on the 2026 battlefield, they do not come back. Now, during the week of May 9th through 11th, 2026, President Donald Trump announced a 3-day ceasefire to mark Russia's Victory Day, the 81st anniversary of the Soviet victory in World War II. Putin accepted. Zelensky, tellingly, said he was allowing Putin to hold his parade in Red Square, a formulation that says more about the moral state of this war than any casualty figure. What happened during the ceasefire? According to a report from the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces used the pause to covertly redeploy troops and field new types of drones, which they launched the moment the ceasefire expired. Russia fired 800 drones at Ukraine during the ceasefire week, despite active peace negotiations with Trump. In the immediate aftermath of the ceasefire's expiration, a Kyiv apartment block was flattened, killing 9 people. 24 hours later, Kyiv's death toll had risen to 24. The message was unmistakable, and it was not directed at Zelensky, it was directed at Trump, because Putin understands that the only force capable of compelling him toward a genuine peace is not Ukrainian military pressure. It is American political pressure, and he is betting that Trump, managing the Middle East crisis, the Strait of Hormuz, China, and midterm political calculations simultaneously, does not have the bandwidth to maintain sustained pressure on the Eastern Front. And while that bet is being placed in the corridors of the Kremlin, 1,170 Russian soldiers are added to the casualty register every 24 hours. Any military strategist in any war room on Earth can calculate where that curve terminates. The question is whether anyone with sufficient political power is willing to stop before it gets there. There is a dimension of this war that official figures never fully capture. BBC Russia and Mediazona, the independent Russian casualty tracking project, have individually documented, by name, the deaths of 217,808 Russian soldiers by May 9, 2026. These are individually verified dead, with death certificates, pension records, local newspaper obituaries, family social media posts. The real number, according to the BBC's own methodology, may be between 332,600 and 480,500 killed in Russian servicemen alone, excluding DPR/LPR militias. Among the confirmed dead, 7,094 officers, 15 Russian generals killed in combat, a figure without precedent in any post-Cold War conflict. In July 2025, a Ukrainian strike on the headquarters of the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade killed 6 officers simultaneously, including Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Navy, Mikhail Gudkov. And here is the demographic detail that Russian analysts are only beginning to articulate openly. The weight of this war is not falling equally across Russia. It is falling on its poor and its ethnic minorities. The groups with the highest per capita death rates are Tuvans, Chukchi, Nenets, and Buryats, indigenous peoples of Siberia and the Russian Far East, with total populations sometimes below 15,000 people, being decimated at rates without recent historical parallel. Moscow and St. Petersburg, the cities the Kremlin politically cannot afford to lose, appear systematically at the bottom of per capita casualty lists. Putin's Russia is fighting this war with the soldiers it considers expendable, and the growing number of convict recruits, 24,534 former prisoners, confirmed among the dead so far, is not an anomaly. It is a deliberate policy of outsourcing death to those whose disappearance causes the least political disturbance inside the garden ring. This is something beyond a human tragedy. It is the anatomy of a regime that is consuming its own margins to keep its center intact. As of May 18, 2026, the date of this recording, Russian forces conducted 195 combat engagements along the front line in the past 24 hours. The Pokrovsk and Huliaipol directions remain the hottest. Ukraine, according to its own tactical indicators, registered more offensive operations than Russian ones over the course of the day, a shift that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Russia controls approximately 20% of Ukrainian territory, an area the size of the state of Pennsylvania, seized at the cost of more than 1 million military casualties, 16 years of oil refining capacity destroyed, and an army that today recruits women from Asian prisons and drunk men from bars in Petrozavodsk. The CSIS estimated in January 2026 that combined Russian and Ukrainian casualties would reach 2 million during the spring of 2026. 2 million human beings. In a conflict Vladimir Putin called a special military operation, one that was supposed to last 3 days. There is one number in this story that summarizes everything. In the first full year of the large-scale invasion, Russia suffered more combat deaths than in all of its wars since World War II combined, including 15 years in Chechnya and 10 years in Afghanistan. In 2026, Russia has already surpassed that milestone again. In 4 months, when you watch an army breaking its own death records, you are not watching victory. You are watching what happens when a system that treats soldiers as disposable assets meets a technology that makes them efficiently disposable. And the question you should be asking is not, when will Ukraine win? The question is, at what point of internal collapse does the Kremlin finally stop? Comment 1. If you believe Russia will pull back before reaching the breaking point. Comment 2. If you believe Putin will continue regardless of the body count, because the records will be broken again tomorrow, and the day after, and the names behind the numbers from Tuva, from Buryatia, from Donetsk, from Petrozavodsk, will keep being added to a list that no Russian government will ever officially acknowledge exists. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never mistake Kremlin's silence for an absence of catastrophe.